we're actually looking to document very, very clearly all of the abuses and neglect that's taking place to the very best of our ability, and we're doing that in two ways. One is we're collecting photographs and detailed reports of as many places as we possibly can, both buildings and units. We're going door to door, we're knocking on doors, we're talking to tenants on a very large scale, and we're taking lots and lots of photographs. If you go to our website at ocap.ca, you can see a few of those photographs. And in the fairly near future, we plan to go to City Hall and put up an actual photo display of the housing conditions that exist within Toronto community housing. But what we're also looking to do is to build towards the tactic that we think can ultimately achieve something very, very important. Clearly, what McGuinty has just announced for the $100 million for the whole province in spending is grossly inadequate. You have a $800 million odd police budget in this city that I think shows that the priority, to say the least, is not housing. But we can't just simply stand by and allow that deterioration to take place. So everywhere you go, tenants always say one thing to you. They say, we'll never get anything from these people until we don't give them their rent. That's the only thing that they'll understand, right? And that seems to us to be a very, very, very good idea. But in talking about it with people, we didn't want to get into a kind of a bureaucratic rent strike where you go to the replacement body for the housing tribunal and try to get their permission to establish an escrow account and just indefinitely hold back the rent. We thought something much more simple would work if we simply took the rent money and spent it on the repairs that people needed. Right? Very, very simply to do that. That's essentially the plan of action that we're working towards. But just as you wouldn't go on strike when you only have 5% of the workers signed up, so you wouldn't organise something like this until you're ready to do it. And so in everything we do, we're working towards that as our goal, the way in which ultimately we think we could challenge decisively what they're going to do. And if you could imagine a situation where you had a critical mass of tenants ready to do this as a first wave, you would then establish a bank account, you would have professional assessment done of the damage that needed to be repaired, and then you would assess tenants individually in terms of how their rent measured up against the scale of the repairs that they needed. And so that tenant X, it would be no money to Toronto Housing for 3 months and a half, and then after that we're all square and I've got my repairs done. Somebody else might have a different quantity. But you would organise en masse, collectively, a rent for repairs campaign. And that's really what we're moving towards. In OCAP, we're very concerned to certainly challenge people, but not just simply for the sake of doing it. We like to find tactics that can actually promise some notion of victory. And that's what we're working towards here, is a decisive situation where an enormous number of tenants spend their rent money, get the repairs done, have a strong enough movement that they can't be isolated and picked off, and then create a situation where really you'd create for people in government an absolute crisis with something like that. Because clearly, if you were able to do it and pull it off, and a lot of people got their places fixed up, there would be nothing stopping people from doing the same. People would all be interested in going down exactly the same road. And so they would either have to have a situation where it was just taken out of their hands, or there was indeed major capital expenditure to repair Toronto community housing. And as a first step towards it, what we're doing is we're going around asking people to sign a letter as a sort of a confidence building thing and as a first crossing of swords with Toronto community housing around this issue. And the letter basically says, you are violating existing legislation by not maintaining my unit at a certain level, a certain basic level. And what I expect you to do is to come in and fix it. But if you do not come in to fix it, I am serving notice to you that I will have no alternative as a last resort but to use the money that I would normally give you to rent to do the repairs. And we're going to put a load of those in very, very soon. And my expectation is that they won't like it a great deal, but my expectation also is that they'll probably respond with some selective concessions, which will be a healthy thing, because some people will get some work done and the confidence of people will be built up. If they try to use a more heavy-handed approach, we'll fight that too. But I think it will be an important step forward. I should perhaps finally say that when we try to approach something, we do try to think in terms of class solidarity. We do try to think in terms of a general working class movement. And I don't think this is just a question of some goodly work with a militant tinge directed towards some people who are poor and live in rent-geared to income housing. I think this is actually something very, very important in terms of standing up to the two pillars of the agenda of capital that I was talking about, removing and destroying social provision and the agenda of upscale urban redevelopment. In both instances, they need to be fought, and I think we would strike with this campaign a blow that should be supported by the movement in general. If you say to workers, what can happen if you go on strike? Well, you can lose the strike and you can lose your job, and then you'll be worse off than you were before. And that remains a risk. But the key to going on strike is to go on strike when you have the support of the workers and when you think for various tactical reasons the employer is defeatable. And that, I think, is the key here. It's not actually that we're advancing something that outlandish or beyond hope, even from a legal point of view, because it's clear that the landlord is not meeting legal obligations to maintain units and buildings and communities to a basic standard. And the argument that somebody else hasn't provided enough money is really irrelevant. I mean, if you were to try driving around the streets with no brakes on your car, and when the cops pulled you over said, well, I would fix my brakes, but Fred owes me $5,000 and he hasn't paid me yet, I don't think you'd get a very warm response. So there would be very serious legal arguments that could be advanced in an imaginary hearing. But on the other hand, the goal is to ensure that it doesn't come to that. You know, the goal is to ensure that this is conducted as a tenant movement, well supported in the broader community, and to not do it until you've arrived at the point where you think you can do that. And you know, you make a calculation. If you had a percentage of tenants ready to participate in this that was big enough and strong enough, at a certain point, I mean, it was illegal to go on strike, and strikes were illegal, and people went on strike and they won, and they made strikes legal under certain circumstances. Similarly here, if you were able to do this and put them in a situation where the only way they could deal with the tenants that weren't paying their rent in Lawrence Heights was to bring in the riot police and evict a healthy percentage of the population, would they do that? And would they be ready for the ramifications of that? I mean, those are the judgment calls that would have to be made before you were ready to actually organise it. So we're talking about something that would be perhaps one of the most ambitious things we've ever considered doing, and we're certainly not going to be leading people into some ridiculous adventure. We're certainly not going to take, 15 families and get them thrown out in the streets. We're talking about, a mass assembly at some point of tenants raising their hands and agreeing to participate in this and going for it. But the really awful thing about the traditional rent strike thing that makes us feel horrified is that you become the de facto rent collector. A percentage of tenants go on strike and you've got to collect the rent from them, and people are having a tough time and they're saying to themselves, well, there's this rent strike on, why should I be paying the rent? And then your only recourse, since your escrow account is being monitored, is to say to people, well, I'm sorry you're not part of this account anymore. You're 3 months in arrears, you're going back to the landlord and he's going to evict you. Like, it's ugly, difficult stuff. Whereas what we're proposing is actually to do something where the money's going to be put to where it's needed. We're going to present them with a fait accompli. One family in Jamestown Crescent in Etobicoke, that over their bathtub, the ceiling has collapsed. And there's like insulation and wires and just hanging down and debris down into the bathtub. And so they would have to actually go to court and say families like that, for doing those repairs, are going to be put out on the street. That'd be a tough proposition. My sense is that if we had the support, we could pull it off, and we could pull it off in a way that it would win.